Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the dead end session at the end. I didn't think we'd see this many. Sticking to the end, that's really great. So, this should be a shockingly dull talk compared to all of the others. This is all about legal, compliance, and all that kind of stuff. What I'm trying to do is cover all the things that the other sessions didn't cover. There'll be a bit of overlap, and we'll see how we do. Just as a quick question, how many of you actually follow full risk management guidance on your AI delivery? Okay, in which case, you're going to learn a lot. That's okay, I'm okay now, right. Anytime. So my name is Robert Hogg, I run a company called Black Marble up here in the north. I'm really pleased to see NDC up here, that's absolutely lovely. I am going to go relatively fast, because I've got a lot of things to talk to you about. I've got a couple of personal observations I put in which don't really fit, but that's purely because I think I wanted to do it. That's fine. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a post probably over the weekend. I'm on LinkedIn. My name is Robert Hogg. It's not that hard to take a picture if you want to. And I'll put all of the links from my presentation and annotations on all of them so you can take something away with you as well. There's 2 other articles I'm going to publish next week on the same blog, predominantly about law and EU AI guidelines and that sort of thing. So if you look on my LinkedIn, you don't have to follow me. If you want to follow me, you want to join me, whatever, that's all fine. But the point is, everything will be there so you can see how we go. So this talk's going to be a bit negative, but that's the nature of what I'm talking about. I'm a big proponent of AI. I love what AI is going to do. I think it's going to change the world. But we've got to talk about the negative to make sure that the negative doesn't happen. So don't think I'm just a down on AI or anything like that, okay? And the answer to nearly every question you're going to ask me is it depends. There isn't a guaranteed answer on literally everything I'm going to talk about. A lot of this is personal perspective or organisational perspective. That's nothing to do with me. I don't know who your organisation is, and I don't know what your principles and priorities are. Another quick question. Does your organisation actually have a set of principles by which the organisation runs? Nope. Well, actually one does, because you work for me, that's fine. But for everybody else, most organisations don't. So don't take any of this as criticism. This is about maybe a roadmap you want to start thinking about. So the first observation I'm going to make, which has nothing to do with the talk, is that everybody's going to lose their jobs. It's a comment I've heard for every 5 years of my career. That's about 40 years, in case those of you being kind think I was younger, which I'm not. Every 5 years through my career, somebody's come up to me and said, you're going to lose your job because of insert new technology. And AI is no different. The reality is, every 5 years, a new technology or a new schema or a new language comes along that allows us to do more with what we've got. If you try to build any of the systems you're building now, 40 years ago, it would be a team of 1,000 people and tens of millions of pounds, not you in a weekend doing something on your laptop. So think of AI as a force multiplier. My general reckonings right now is AI will add 20% productivity to most people. And that's what we'll see aggregate over the next few years. If people are asking for more, you're probably going to be in a world of pain. So stick with a 20% number and you probably won't get hurt. So let's move on to the more general. So AI needs some very specific things which most organizations cannot provide or do not provide. We need data quality, we need governance, most organizations don't have that, data standards, that sort of thing, ethics specifically, and more importantly, people understand the outputs. But that's you guys, so that part's sorted. You're absolutely good. But who's actually going to deliver that when all of those parts are missing? And actually part of this conversation is about how do you actually get your organization to adopt AI properly. That's what I want to talk to you about. Only for the fact that I've got a really cool graphic. Let's talk about hallucination. For those of you who saw the keynote, there was a very important set of concepts around people normalize things that shouldn't be normal. If you said in a regular piece of code or a delivery, maybe a banking application, and you phoned your bank and said, why has all the money disappeared from my bank account? Oh, our central finance system started hallucinating and you've got no money. Oh, okay, it's hallucination. I don't mind losing all my money. That's just not normal. And the fact that these are being normalized is a problem. I defer to the keynote. If you didn't see the keynote, watch it later if you can. And the last point before actually going on to the downside is think about the evolution over just the last 3 years in AI. And this is actually a massive negative comment. We started with LLMs, we thought, oh, they're fantastic, aren't they doing right? And after about a year, the problems with LLMs started to turn up, and we went, what we can do is we can apply RAG, and then that'll make things a lot better. And then a year later going, well, actually, okay, there's problems with RAG as well. Agents is the new answer. And if you can't spot a general trend in that we're just going to keep having problems. And it's just how the way that our industry is working. But rushing to the new thing and not fixing the old things is going to be the problem. Okay, onto the plot. Let's do a downside conversation and see how we do. So the classic myths that I talk to customers about, and the two that worry me the most, AI is easy, and I'm going to come back to that much later on, and it'll replace decision making, and that's just dangerous. Just as a comment for your customers. But general risks are, we have malfunctions where the AI is not working correctly, we have misuse where people are using AI incorrectly, and then systemic risks, which is pretty much going to be the rest of this talk. And malfunctions is really around actually, the task that the AI set was not defined properly, the prompt was incorrect, or it's going to leak some data. Now you might say, well, all I'm doing is I'm asking an AI to optimize how many paper clips we've got. And when you think about putting paper clips out, you can't really do anything wrong. You're setting AI a very simple task, and the simple task is just build me more paper clips. Nothing could really go wrong with that. But that's not the case. What you haven't done is you haven't put up any guardrails. You haven't put any thought control into the AI. You haven't put the boundaries and the guardrails up to actually deliver that correctly. And I left you to read. If you wanted to read, that's fine. But part of the question is, do we put humans in the loop to actually stop some of this work? And then on misuse, we've got things like synthetic media, AI impersonation, and then sort of large bot scale attacks and phishing and that kind of thing. And it's going to happen. I'm going to skip through a couple of failures. You should know most of these in the industry if you don't look them up. And if you want, I'll put some notes in the blog post as well. But things like the flash crash, an AI just got a wrong signal coming in 2010, for those you don't know, and about $1 trillion was knocked off the stock market in about 10 minutes. A lot of the other AIs and algorithms started catching up, and then after a while it rectified itself. Within a couple of hours, all the money was back on the market. But more important things like, does everybody know what Microsoft Tay? Yeah, so you know Microsoft Tay basically went public, it was poisoned by outsiders and did some pretty unpleasant things. I'll put some notes up about those later, making a point. The one that people aren't talking about, which I'm very concerned about, just for reference, Lego is wonderful. I'm not saying anything negative about Lego. My wife says I spend too much, but that's different. Exactly the same with cookie blindness. You go in now to a site, do you accept cookies? Yes, no, it's a Tuesday, I don't accept cookies, whatever your policy is. But people generally, most people just say yes. And AI is going to have that problem. The AI said I should do this, well, I'll probably just do it. Especially with things like policing. So in our policing applications, we don't give any of the users direct AI feedback prompts. They're given a set of suggestions to say, have you considered this? You should take some action. And it's a very important, cookie blindness or AI blindness is going to hit us over the next 2 years. That's my personal prediction, and I'm hoping I'm wrong, but I'm not going to be. Before we get on to the legal stuff, which we want to talk about, we're going to do a quick section on, I'm assuming everybody understands bias, right? So I'm going to do this nice and quick. But there's a common problem in a lot of data we have, and that's the generic pale male, as many of us in the room are quite guilty of that, I'm afraid. Where things like Tesla didn't recognize people who weren't white initially when they were doing their collision detection, that kind of thing. Bit of a problem for a car, maybe, take a view. And hand dryers that don't work and that sort of thing. And in general life, you've got the standard bias, gender, beauty, thank you very much, halo horns. And again, if you don't know these, do look them up. The one I see more often than not, which actually has the biggest problems, one in public sector, certainly in policing, is conformity, that people won't necessarily stand up and say no, and you've got to do that early. Authority bias is a big problem again in public sector. And then the idiosyncratic bias, where you judge people by your own ability. Now, this is a disrespectful comment about pretty much everybody in the room. You're all very talented people, you know AI, you know where you're going, you know security, and you will judge people based on your own knowledge and abilities, not on what they actually can do. And with developers, I see it more than anybody else, flip the bozo bit and think all of your customers are idiots. Judge them if they're a clinician who specializing in cancer, trust that they might know a lot about cancer. And just because they don't know about AI delivery doesn't make them an idiot. Just a comment. I'll be off bias in about 2 minutes. So we want to make bias visible in anything we do. Bias can come from our training data, it can come from different catastrophic ways of data manipulation and all that kind of stuff. But whether it's on gender or ethnicity or religion, it doesn't really matter. People are biased. But AIs just take data. And in data, we're really thinking about, is the data sets we're training from good? The data set maybe doesn't reflect the actual case we're looking at. If you look at historic data, maybe in the UK police, sort of from the 1970s, it was very racially and lower class biased. The region you were, your postcode, everything else would have a massive impact on how police systems viewed you. That's not the case anymore, genuinely. Absolutely fantastic, modern policing is great. Making sure that the training set actually with historic doesn't bias you as well, and then make sure that the data model isn't unfairly biased as just a basic trait. So how do we solve this? Now, this is actually going to come back to a whole pile of things I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. I think the best solution is actually diversity. And again, you think I'm beating you up in the conversation. That's not the aim of this, right? But if the only people designing a system are a set of devs and AI engineers, you're going to have a very narrow view of what you do. So think about building a team of clinicians or experts, whatever you're going to do, have a different set of people, have a different mindset from you, think about how that affects the data, where the data's coming from, and then actually look at the actual models you're building and make sure that they're diverse as well. So diversity in thought, mind, and skill set can help you alleviate algorithmic bias. It's not a guarantee, but it's a certain direction. So coming back to think about the training data, fine-tuning if you've got an AI, prompt guidance, monitoring, and AI apps. We're going to go back to that. Right. Let's do the important stuff. We're talking about responsible AI. And what do we actually mean by that? We want systems to be treating us in a reliable, ethical, and principled manner. Now, at the start, I ask you all a question. Does your organization have a set of principles that it runs by? And most don't. And I don't mean whatever the marketing department spits out to make you look good to people you're selling to, actual principles you run your organization by. And if not, defining those is actually going to be a key part of delivering AI. And as part of that, we've got to think about what does social good mean? And we're again talking about we want fair treatment in a reliable, safe, accountable, and explainable way. That's how you want all of your AI to work. Now, it might be we're just building something to, again, count paper clips or something like that, slightly different case. But a lot of you have AIs that are interacting with people and delivering to people day in, day out. So to do that, we've now got to think about what are ethics. And the problem for a lot of people think ethics are very straightforward to understand. So we've really got a discipline concern about what is morally good or bad. And this is where you start to have nuance about character and people. But think about it more as a fundamental decision-making technology and a set of standards by which you would judge a machine by human actions. If a human did a bad thing, you'd say do a bad thing, make sure that your AI doesn't do the same. So the classic one is, this is by Philippa Foot, a train's coming down, you've got control of the lever, and a set of people are going to die, whichever way, but who do you choose? We've seen enough action films that you always find a way around, but my wife, daughter, and friend, or my younger daughter, who's awesome, Well, you know, I could be single for a while. No, was that not the right ethical decision? Kill my wife? No? Okay. We don't have to make those decisions in reality, but, and my wife is lovely, by the way, she's outside. Don't tell her I said anything bad, okay. Right. So AI ethics follows that trait. It's a very interesting problem we have, that we want the ethics of our systems to match our own moral ethics. And we need to because of things like LLMs, which actually do respond to ethical conundrums. So we need a set of guidelines that help us do this in a defined, methodical, repeatable manner that we can say we have achieved well. It's a very complex and multifaceted problem to solve. So let me try and break it down so it's going to work. Fundamentally, we've got to make everything accountable. That's a logging, auditing, whatever you decide to do. On top of that, we want transparency. So that means we want to know what's the AI doing and why. Now, with things like LLMs, that can be problematic. But with reasoning AIs, that's now much more likely that you could get a reason for its actions. And where possible, audit those actions and that reliability. So you might actually say, we're going to do this, we're going to use a reasoning model. Why don't you just log what the reasoning was so you can look back and find out why the decisions were made? It's not going to take you much effort, and I promise you the outcomes will be quite profound. Most people run the AIs, and at the end, only compare the outcomes. But you now have a step model showing you what's happening, log and audit that, and then you can actually tune your models better to find out what you need to do to make it better or fix any catastrophic problems. On top of that, we've then got fairness. Go back to bias. That's fairly straightforward. We want to make sure that everything we do has privacy. We want to make sure everything's inclusive. And we want to make sure everything's reliable as well. So this actually comes from policing and their code of ethics. I'll just stretch that slightly, and I've just messed everything up. Never mind. What's showing there? There we go. Haven't messed everything up. Yes, I have. So there's an applied code of ethics that UK policing use, which I think applies to all AI delivery. It's fairly straightforward. Build it, run it, test it, monitor it, refine, and come back again. Very straightforward. Basically, we put up the guardrails, guide, monitor, and assess, and you're fairly straightforward. Now, here's a personal view. I think the foundations of responsible AI are the intersection between the principles of your organization, the law, and your ability to deliver, and sort of the ethics of how you're going to do that. If you can keep in that golden area, everything you deliver will be absolutely fantastic. But with cost, everybody tries to knock things out fast and don't do any of that work. If you're running in anything mission critical, hospitals, cancer screening, anything like that, policing, avoid the race to the bottom. Now, it's not a bid for me to say, oh, come to us and spend lots of money. That's not how this works. This is, if you apply all of the rules, the regulations, and the risk management, it takes time and effort. So make your vendors prove that they're doing all the right things all the way through their process. So let's talk about governance, regulation, and all the interesting things. You remember earlier I said, I'm going to come back to this, when you just said, how do you get diversity? Well, actually, now we're talking about governance, governance, regulation, and legal. Who's going to do your legal compliance? Why not add part of your legal team into your AI and compliance team? Typically, AI compliance is IT. Bring in legal, bring in data scientists, bring in other people in your organization, management, dare I say, salespeople, whoever's actually going to help you define what you need and bring them in to do that work. So then think about governance in a set of things. We've talked about responsibility, purpose we'll come back to, accountability is fairly straightforward. The two or three that make the biggest difference to most organizations, you would hope it would be legal regulation, which we'll come to in a while, but actually the public narrative. If you make widgets or you read gerbils and you ship out a whole pot of gerbils and they die an hour later, you're going to look bad. More people are worried about the public narrative of anything they do than the legal consequences, which is shockingly bad, but that's just the world we live in. The top one, though, is safety. And here's a question for you. If the goal is responsible and safety is the goal, how do we define responsible? And the answer is it's actually quite hard. Now, I'd suggest maybe think about what would be irresponsible to do and don't do that. I know that might sound a bit stupid, but if you actually think about exactly what would be responsible in every instance, it's actually quite hard. But you could say we definitely shouldn't do that, and that. So think about responsibility and irresponsibility as a pairing to help you define the outcomes, if that kind of makes sense. And explainable AI, we're going to come back to in a few minutes. So, how many of you actually tell your customers and other parts of your organization that you're using AI? Apart from people who work for me. So, 2, okay. Now I have to say, I'd like to take credit for this. Unfortunately, it's Adam Coogan from SSW, who's actually a genuinely lovely man, unless he's watching it, in which case he's absolutely horrible. We have in our terms and conditions that we use AI. We point it out to our customers because we use it for our coding, we use it for our fault finding, and we give our customers the option of saying no, and we will not use AI in that project. But we add 20% to the cost. And every single customer then faced with an extra bill has then said, actually, do you know what? We suddenly don't have an objection to the problem. But by calling it out at the start, you can't get caught for it later. So I strongly advise all of you and all your organizations to publicly say that you use AI, what you're using it for, so customers can then object or not object, and then everyone's fully informed. You remember that transparency I was talking about earlier? Exactly that. Talking about the law, in the UK there currently is not one. There will be at some point in the future. In the US there are dozens, if not hundreds of laws going through various parts of their government. And there's no consistency in any of it, the truth be told. So right now, you're not under any legislation that matters, unless you're in the EU. Now, for those in the EU, you'll know this already. For those of you who aren't in the EU from the UK, you'll say, why are you talking about this? The chances are the UK laws will look 95% similar to the EU laws. And I advise everybody in the room to at least, I'll be writing, I said, some summaries over the next few days on the EU laws, read those, and I'll have all the links, read the rest. Probably not the thing you want to do right now, but if you're building an AI for the next few years, make sure it's compliant, at least within a sensible margin. But everything I'm talking about in this talk covers all of that work already. Currently, the EU laws is it's already enacted, but it doesn't become really mandatory for the next couple of years. There is some action to delay quite a few of the parts, which I think is a bit sad, to be honest. Get it over and done with, get it moving. AI isn't that new, really, and you should be able to enact most of the things in the guidance already. I'll just look at the time. I will have to speed up. I apologize. Just double check. Right. So, just an example in case you didn't know it. In 2019, a gentleman was on an Avianca flight from El Salvador to New York, and he claimed that he'd had some damage because of a trolley crash into his knee. I don't know if any of you, apart from people in my group, know anything about this one. No? Okay. He tried to present it in regular court. He left it too long, so he put it into a federal court. Now, what was lucky is his lawyers found a whole pile of absolutely fantastic case law that allowed him to slam dunk a federal case and get himself exorbitant amounts of money because it's a US court. However, the lawyers involved, which was Matta's lawyer, who's called Stephen Schwartz, provided an incredible case, absolutely fantastic. Unfortunately, Avianca's lawyers couldn't find any of this case law whatsoever. Not a single piece of it. A federal judge then basically shouted at Avianca for being a bit useless, And Avianca quite sensibly said, go on then, show us. The federal judge could not find any of the case law either. And then after some debacle, and if you ever want to see this case, if you don't know the legal on YouTube, it's all on there, absolutely fantastic. I'm not taking credit for this, but basically they'd used ChatGPT to do the search, and ChatGPT, being very helpful, had made up every single of the references they put into a federal case, which you have to sign that they're correct, and it's a breach of federal law and a whole pile of things. Just in case you're interested, Google has a very nice thing called Google Scholar. If you're not familiar, do look at Google Scholar. It's pretty amazing. If you just typed in any of those things, it would have told you that they didn't exist. And if you want to know, that's exactly how you break down the case and look at the volume, which not one of the client's lawyers bothered to do. It would take about 30 seconds. So simply, what should they have done? Not use ChatGPT, I think it's the first part, but there's cases where, when you've got something like an LLM, reining it in very hard, set it to ultra conservative, bring down the temperature, and make sure it works. Okay, back to the plot. So I'm going to use UK government as a general conversation about standards now. All of these, again, I'll list for you. So the UK government's got a couple of good, and just in case you come across them, a couple of fairly ropey documents. So initially there's some risk assessment, impact, principles and transparency. I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't bother reading them. I'll list them for you just in case you find them, but they're not really worth the effort. What is actually quite good, though, is there's an artificial intelligence playbook by the UK government that actually covers everything from helping your business understand getting AI. And we're going to come back to how you help your business understand AI in a few minutes. The one which I really would suggest you all look at, now the Office for Artificial Intelligence has disappeared. It's now part of the Department for Science and Innovation Technology. But unlike the name Office of Artificial Intelligence, I'm going to keep it on the slide. But there's a site called aistandards.org, which lists all of the current AI standards. More importantly, it's actually got free training that covers standards, guidance, risk management, and conference videos on standardization and compliance. They're all in there, cost you nothing, definitely worth a go. The only problem is there's about 35 pages of different standards for AI. And I don't know how many of you got time enough to read all of those, so the answer is probably not many. So let me condense it over the next few slides to the ones you probably want to look at. Okay. But do look at that. The training on compliance and standards is very good, and it'll give you what you need. Now, now I am a Microsoft Regional Director. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I'm not being paid by Microsoft to say this is a side comment. There is a standard document, and it's free from the Microsoft Responsible AI Standard, and it's well worth looking at for doing an assessment on a project. Not all of your standards, not for your organization, we'll do that in a minute, but actually look at this to actually help you do a complete mapping on any single project you do, and it breaks after the impact assessment, transparency, fairness, where you're getting your data from, so you can actually audit everything you do and present it to your organization. It is genuinely very good. So we use a mix of this and two others, which I'll come on to in a minute. Then we've got the joys of industry regulation, which there isn't much, but I expect to see more industry regulation coming in the next 2 to 3 years than actual legal regulation, which is, again, a bit sad, but legal takes time, and it has to be completely fair. So, segue into something completely random, for most of you, apart from those of you who are in policing, is the covenant on using artificial intelligence in policing. Now you're thinking, I don't care about policing, and, well, you should, it helps you, but the actual covenant that was put together by the Chief Constables of the UK is actually very interesting in how it's constructed. It's not really constructed for the development people, it's actually constructed for the teams managing the developers and how that's done. And more importantly, it lays out foundational principles by which the police should build and judge all of their AIs. They're all very straightforward, they're done in detail in the document, but I would argue that every single company and every single AI delivery should at least follow those basic principles. Is it lawful? Is it transparent? Is it explainable? So I would look at the covenant of policing, which is a strange thing to say for most of you, and some of you probably more applicably. Have a look at that because it's a really useful way to actually focus how you're thinking about some of the ethics. Staying in policing, and again, it's not just because of the area, it's just actually the material is very good. Interpol, of all people, have actually built an AI assessment. And it's a workbook and a package of material that you can work with your organization to actually build all of those principles and the needs of the organization out. Again, it's around risk management and all that, organizational culture, people expertise, processes, that kind of thing. But it really is very high quality. Very easy to digest because, again, your problem, I'm going to say everything you do is perfect because you're all delightful people in the room. But you've got to have this in your organization and you've got to educate your organization, and this will help you do that. Okay. The one we actually use, we use that to help educate people, but the one which is, I'm going to say the de facto standard right now, how that stands up in the future, I can't promise you, is NIST, which is an American organization, and they produced a complete AI risk management framework. I would urge you to go through the risk management framework. It's probably the most important thing I'm going to tell you in this entire conversation. And it's about how you're going to actually manage your risk all the way through. And it's really a couple of simple steps. First of all, we're actually going to govern and actually look at your accountability, your risks, your policies, your processes. It's all the things you'd expect, but it's nicely laid out and helps you map that out. Again, you get a playbook to fill in. And then it means at the end of each process you do, you can prove you've done all the right things. Because unlike software development, AI is slightly different because you've got to think about consequences late on. You know, software, you fix the software. AI can quite often be a little bit more difficult to fix. You've got to work out what steps you took, unwind some of the steps and put them back in. Then you basically define your understanding of the problems, and you can map your ability to deliver and then actually track that all the way through the process. Measure everything you do, define your monitoring, your metrics, and the system you're building, and get it actually to deliver at the end. And then, quite straightforward at the end, taking all of the govern, map, measure, report on it, act, any risk management violations, that kind of thing, bring those to the fore and bring them out. So NIST is the most important thing you're going to look at, followed by the joy of ISO 42000-001. And I'm not going to blame anybody in the room who made me look at things last night, but I spent most last night updating my slides on governance, and a few bits we'll come to later. This is about management and improving artificial intelligence management systems, basically making sure you're doing responsible development, management, deployment, and then actually retirement of your AI as well. Here's the important part, though. If you go through the NIST frameworks, which actually helps you step by step all the way through, it'll get you most of the way to your ISO compliance because NIST was actually tied up with the ISO delivery. So I would tie the two together. I would also say that the harder piece is which risk management framework to pick. And the answer is, depends. I told you that was going to come up a few times. If you have no risk management whatsoever, trying to implement NIST will take you months and months, and you'll probably get hung, drawn, and quartered by your company for just spending all your time doing management. So I would look at things like the Microsoft one and maybe even the Interpol one as a stopgap to make sure you're starting going in the right direction with a long-term aim of implementing NIST in your organization, and so on. Now, as part of that, how many of you actually build AI risk matrices? Apart from my lot. Fine. So you think, oh, it's going to be fairly straightforward. It is. We actually want to categorize risk, and whatever you decide that categorization is fine. We want to look at the likelihood of harm. And what I've actually seen people is just give two numbers for the whole of their AI. But what I would like you to think about is view through a set of lenses for every one of those cases. So you actually should have a multi-dimensional set. What quality is your system? And that set will give you a very good indication of how your system works. Now, again, to criticize everyone in the room, which is very rude, I'm a very rude man. The problem is, don't judge your own homework. You remember I said that you're going to look at, if 4 or 5 of you are working together, you're all going to be thinking the same way. Get somebody outside of your group or your organization to come in and do that. That's not a sales pitch or anything like that. Somebody else outside of your organization saying, here's what we'd like you to judge us by. Please fill in this form. You won't like the results the first few times you do it. Because again, developers, AI specialists are very focused on a set of outcomes, and you need that broader experience when you think about your AI management group, which we'll come on to in just a second. Brief note on copyright. The UK is very forward-thinking. We actually have a vague copyright that covers some of AI generation, which is Section 9.3 of the 1988 Copyright Act. I am looking that up in my notes just to get the numbers right. It allows you to say, if I direct an AI to generate something, then in fact the output belongs to me because I told it what to do. However, there's a whole pile of consultation papers. If you go onto the AI standards I talked about earlier, there's a whole pile of studies and consultation going on right now about, is that applicable? And that's going to rage around the world. Now in the US, you can't copyright any AI-generated work. Leads to an interesting question. If you're writing code, and you use something like Copilot or Claude, and they generate even a line of code, you can't copyright that. Which means your company can't copyright its code base anymore. I'll leave that in your brain to think about. I don't have an answer, but mildly terrified is probably the right answer over here. I think the UK scheme is probably the right one. I've directed it to do something. Look for an error in my code. My code, just for reference, I've got staff in the audience. My code never has errors, just for reference. But imagine the unlikely event that I did have an error and I used an AI to help fix it. I'd like to think that I'd maybe still own the code at the end of that experience. In the UK, that is in fact the case. Outside the UK, that's not the case. I'm not making any of you happy. That wasn't the aim of this talk, by the way. Quickly, I'm going to wrap up shortly. Let's think about safety and explainable AI. The problem with a lot of AI is fundamentally we're going to have a black box and we don't know what it does. Going back to the explainable models, it's always useful to think about a complexity versus explainability. So linear regression, you can look at the numbers and pretty much work it out by hand. A neural network, an LLM, and that kind of thing, probably not. Which is why the explainable models start to make a massive impact in your safety of the system you're doing. A lot of people turn them off because they cost more money to run. Do you want safety or do you want cheap? Take a view. So I think about AI safety as alignment. Does the system I'm building work in all intended use cases? It delivers bias and fairness in a way that we find acceptable, and it works in all the intended use cases. Robustness, okay, unforeseen circumstances, the AI can correct, but in most unusual circumstances, it can do something sensible, and it can actually have ethics against adversarial attacks. And then corrigibility, just for reference, that is a word, I had to look it up, that the system is capable of being corrected and rectified or reformed on its own basis to allow it to enable and detect and correct mistakes in real time and then actually improve itself over time. I would aim for alignment for nearly anything you do with a bit of robustness for safe measure. That would be the level I go for. But what's been noticeable, though, is safety is being replaced with security. And I'll give you an example in just a minute, that safety of AI systems is almost now so tightly mixed with security you can't separate them. It's just the way of the world. I'm assuming you're all familiar with OWASP. Are all of you familiar with the top 10 LLM vulnerabilities? I'm actually getting nods from most of the audience, so I won't skip that in, but new in this year are about 4 areas. I'll let you look them up, that's fine. What there is, though, there's another nice white paper about 13 principles of delivery for quality of AI by the Department of Science and Innovation Technology. But I wouldn't read that, because as I found out yesterday, somebody very rudely made me do work last night, ETSI TS 104223, which just rolls off the tongue, gives you those 13 principles in a more secure form. It's been finished, it's now a standard for baseline AI security. And it covers design, development, deployment, maintenance, and more importantly, end of life and how you remove it to make it deliver it safely. What's interesting is another group in the UK, which again, everyone outside the UK can use, is the EIO Security Institute, which previously was the Safety Institute. Again, that changed from safety to delivery. Now, they have lots of really interesting research. They're pulling all the research and articles and standards together. And I would hope that the standards and them would merge at some point in time to give you a slightly better view of everything. But I would strongly urge you spend some time on this site. Just read through some of the articles because it will change your view of how everything's done. On to the last stretch. So how do you actually pull all of this together? I mean, obviously adopting a framework and everything else, but the thing I'm going to ask you to think about doing more than anything else is actually build an AI management group in your organization. Depends on the size of your organization. If you're building a product to sell, that'd be slightly different. But in the same way cloud is no longer an IT problem, AI is no longer an IT problem, developer problem either. Your organization is a cloud organization. Your organization is an AI organization. And at that point, you've got to start bringing other people in your organization into your pool of talent for making the decisions about risks and principles and everything else. And the aim is not just to get them involved to tell you how to stop and do things, but also actually how to get the rest of the organization to adopt what you're doing and make sure it just permeates your organization. So we think about security concerns, business agility, and all that kind of thing. I'm going to go through these quite quickly because I think I'm running out of time. But we actually want to sort of build an AI strategy. We want to define all of the things we were talking about, the principles, the goals, risk assessment, because this is about building confidence in your organization that AI isn't going to damage it, it's going to make it better, and it's not going to, and I'm going to say in the case of police, make critically bad decisions that's going to end up at the front page of a newspaper. And when your organization are aligned with you, hopefully you get more resources and everything works a lot better. Fundamentally, the management group needs to define the methodologies for governance, data performance, and monitoring. And then, in the case of public bodies, how you then maintain public competence as well. I'm not going to go through this one in detail, but you actually want every single project to go through a full risk assessment. The one I would use, going back to earlier, is the Microsoft risk assessment for a project-by-project basis. It's very fast and it's very encourageable so it's very easy for non-AI and techies to actually follow through what you're trying to achieve. So it's the most of RAI impact assessment. And the last few pieces, as I just wrap up, why do organizations struggle with AI? Fundamentally, they don't have a data culture. They'll have siloed data. You can't get all the data to train your models properly. A lot of organizations don't fundamentally actually understand their own business processes, and it's no different from dev. AI is the same problem. And then the organizational structures, hence the reason for going for the management group to try and get around organizational structure problems and then get some proper quality. A couple of comments, and then we're going to wrap up. The number one problem I see in organizations who are adopting, there's some great tooling, some great AIs from various vendors, things like Copilot and that kind of thing. There's a really weird belief in organizations that you don't need to train people on AI. It's absolutely baffling. You are giving users who are not trained in IT, let alone anything else, probably some of the most advanced technology this planet's ever delivered, and then saying, just type in what you want, hope for the best, see what happens. I would expect that 1 hour of training per user about, here's some examples. Simple things like, I want to create a PowerPoint. Oh, well, if you're going to create a PowerPoint, here are 10 sample things you could ask for just to get you going. Once people are going, they'll understand the rest. I mean, I've trained thousands, if not tens of thousands of developers to program, and I did a whole part of experimentation teaching novice programmers who are adults. And the simple learning was, if I could get them to code more than 10 lines of code, they'd be able to code for the rest of their life. If they struggle on the first 10 lines of code, they would never touch it again. And I suspect, I don't have evidence, nobody's trying to see me, no Microsoft or anything like that, I suspect that most people see the AI and poke it now and again with a simple request when it could be changing their lives. So, as part of that management, do ask your organization to provide at least some rudimentary training for your organization. This is going to sound like I'm beating up Microsoft, dear me. There is a caution that there's a big push for, because there's not many AI developers or AI experts, that maybe we could get people who can't program to build AIs. Now, if you just looked at the last hour I talked about, and you're all going, yeah, we don't do all of that, we probably should do some risk management, we probably should do some security, oh dear, hopefully the fat man won't shout at me. I won't, don't worry. If we're struggling, and that's the case, all of us are struggling already, there's so much to learn, so much to do, how on earth is somebody who doesn't know the industry going to cope? So there is a, let's knock out AIs with people who don't understand the consequences. Genuinely, I'm terrified. And I'm hoping, this is the last point, oh no, we've got a security piece. This sounds like a cloud operating model. For those who aren't familiar, cloud operating models are fairly straightforward. We've got some fundamental piece at the bottom, DevOps. I haven't gone through AI Ops today because I'm assuming one of the other talks will cover that quite nicely. Best practice, governance, security. All of these are the things I've been talking about. And then on top of that, AI and delivery and everything else. Standard model. If you don't know about it, I have white papers you're more than welcome to on that as well. And then the last piece, the summary is fairly straightforward. We have oversight at the bottom. We want an implementation, organisational changes, and a set of principles to deliver fairly straightforward AI. I'm absolutely confident everyone in the room is doing a great job. The thing is now documenting it and just make sure it's actually provable to other people. And I think that's us done with about 2 minutes over, so I apologise for 2 minutes. Any questions? Or total silence because you want to go home to the train? No questions? In which case, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, come to the end.